Hi. Hi there. Glad you can make it. My name's Michael Fudge, and this is another SQL screencast. In this SQL screencast, we'll be looking at transactions. We'll talk about what are transactions and how they work, the elements in SQL, the data transaction language statements like begin transaction, commit, rollback. We'll also talk about the difference between turning implicit transactions on or the default, which is having implicit transactions off. We'll look at the special variable tran count, and then last but not least we'll focus on a rationale or a need for transactions in SQL. So once you understand what they are, then I'll explain why you would want to use something like this. Alright, let's begin by taking a look at the table that we'll use in our example today. I have this table I created called accounts. It has 3 columns in it: an account number, an account type, and account balance. In this particular example, once I'm trying to mimic the functionality of a really basic bank. So the account number, which might be 101, and the account type might be checking or savings. So together those form a primary key, as you can see, and then there's a constraint on the account balance. It has to be bigger than or equal to 0, and there's a constraint on the account type. It has to be either a C for checking or an S for savings. So after I create my table, I've got some inserts here. You'll see that for this example, I'm inserting one person's account, 2 types, checking, saving, and I'm giving them values, and then another person's account, checking and saving, and giving them values. And then last but not least, I'm selecting it to make sure that the data is there. So when I execute this, there we go, you'll see that I've got my 2 accounts here. This person's 101, 102, checking, saving, account balance 500, 5,000, 0, 1,500. Let me begin by explaining a global setting in your database called implicit transactions. What you normally would say here in an SQL script is set implicit transactions, and then on or off, depending on what you want to do. And the default is off. When it's set to off, this is what we refer to as auto commit mode. And what this means is that every data manipulation language statement that you issue, whether it's an insert, an update, or delete, because those are the only 3 DML statements that affect the data in the tables and therefore change the underlying state of the data in the tables. Whenever you execute one of these statements, they're permanent. There's 4 properties of every transaction: ACID, atomic, consistent, isolated, and durable. And what we're saying here is when you perform this insert, when the insert's done, you know that you're guaranteed it didn't conflict with any other insert. It occurred independent of any other operation on the table, and it's persistent. It's there for good. Now, sometimes you might not want that to happen. Sometimes you might want to manipulate the data in a table and then test some various logic and say to yourself, well, I don't like what happened. I'd like to undo all of that. So what I'm going to do first is show you how that works, and then after we learn more about it, we'll learn how to write real transaction safe code. So let's start with our implicit transactions off, which, by the way, this is the default. So I really don't have to say this up here, but I'll just leave it up here for now. And when you have implicit transactions off, whenever you want a transaction, you have to start with begin transaction. So just to give you an idea, let me run a select here. Select everything from accounts. Right, that's going to show you our 4 accounts. Then what I'm going to do is insert 2 more accounts here. I'm going to insert account number 103, and let's give this person a lot of money here. Pardon me. Give this person a lot of money. There we go. And then all of this is occurring within the transaction. So I'm just trying to shorten this up a bit. Pardon me again. What this means is when I say begin transaction, I'm going to treat these all as if they were part of the same operation on the database. That is, none of this stuff will persist into the database until I issue a command called commit. When I say commit, it then takes these two operations and executes them as one logical unit onto the database table. So if, for example, if more than one person were in here trying to insert, this little lump of code here guarantees that these two inserts happen together, so that no one kind of slips in between these two inserts because they're isolated in their own transaction. If I were to run a select in here, what's interesting about transactions, if I run a select in here, right, you'll see these two rows added to accounts, but if I then undo them with a rollback and then execute a select, what you'll notice is that at the beginning and the end we have the same number of rows. So without further ado, let me show you what happens here. And I think we can leave this one out because we know that there's 4 rows before that. So let's run this here, and let me show you the output. Nope. Okay, so you see it says, see 103 is here, there's 5 rows. And then if you look down here, there's 4 rows because we rolled it back. If we said commit, it would have saved those changes. So again, anything that occurs between the begin transaction and either the rollback or the commit statement represents one action that occurs on the database. All these inserts occur together as one action, independent of any other actions that might occur on the database at the time. Another way that you can implement transactions is by using the implicit transactions on. When you have implicit transactions on, you don't need begin transaction anymore. What happens is the first time it encounters a data manipulation statement that affects data in a table, it will then begin its own transaction. What's neat about setting implicit transactions on is it really allows you to run SQL statements as you feel the need to, and then when you know you've got things the way you want, you can commit or roll back. So this is the undo feature that you've always wanted when you're using SQL. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to run these 2 inserts, and I'm not going to do a rollback or a commit at this point. So I'm going to execute this, and now you'll see that there's my 2 additional rows that I added. Okay, wonderful. And now I'm going to say, well, I really didn't want those 2 inserts to go in there. So normally to get these out it would be quite a disaster, but because I turned implicit transactions on and I'm still in the process of doing a transaction, as you can see, if I were to type in this, you'll see that we're still in the middle of a transaction, because the transaction count, the tran count, is 1, which means we started a transaction but we haven't committed or rolled it back yet. So even though when I run this select again, you'll see that there's 6 rows in here. Row 5 and 6, which are the last 2 inserts, technically haven't really been committed to the database yet. They're kind of like in temporary land, and until I execute a commit, they won't go into the database. If I issue a rollback here and then execute the rollback and then execute the select, you'll see that we're back to 4 rows again. So again, what I'm showing you here is that with these transactions, you have a greater degree of control over, you can execute the same statements that you already know, but you have a greater degree of control over when they actually get committed and saved into the database table. So one more time here, we'll try this one. Let's run this. Notice how I don't have to say set implicit transactions on again and again and again. Once I turn, it's a global setting. Once I turn it on, it's on until I turn it off again. That's why you kind of have to be careful. Even if I were to open up a new query here, it would still have implicit transactions on. A lot of times when I'm doing this stuff, if I want to have one whole script where I just use implicit transactions, I make sure at the end I turn it back off again. Anyway, let me run this insert. Okay, and then check my transaction count again. There's one transaction outstanding. Now I'm going to commit it. I'm going to commit this transaction and then check my tran count. Tran count's 0. So if I try and roll back now, well, let me just show you. So if I look at the table now, there's 6 rows in it. So now you're like, well, let's roll back. Okay, it says roll back, but nothing rolled back because there's nothing to roll back from anymore. Remember, at this insert, it created a transaction up here, started the transaction. When we got down and we finally did the commit, it saved and committed that transaction. So at that point, it's permanent, and there's no more undoing or no more rolling back. Well, hopefully that explains the basics of what transactions can do. Again, the idea is that you can nest a bunch of insert, delete, or update statements into a transaction so that they execute as a logical unit of work. In the next step, we're going to look at a rationale for why you'd want to do this. Okay, I set implicit transactions back to off, which is again auto commit. So I'm going to execute that, and now I'm back in explicit mode, which means I have to start my transactions with begin transaction. So let's look at an example of why you'd want to do this. Okay, so let's start this way. Let's take a look at everything that's in this table again. So you might think of writing some kind of routine that transfers money around. Like you might say, how do I transfer, I don't know, $1,000 from checking to savings? You might say update accounts, set account balance to whatever it is. Right? Take account balance minus, what did I say, $1,000. And then now you have to pick an account. Let's pick a 101 savings, right? So account number 101, account type, and account type savings. So that pulls 1,000 out of the savings, and then let's add it to the checking by saying this.